This is the Fight Block, UFC 133, Rashad Evans versus Tito Ortiz 2, also known as UFC 133 Cursed, is live August 6th. I got Matt back here. We're going to do predictions. We're going to first talk about 3 fights on the prelims that we're both pretty stoked about, and then go on to the main card. So let's get started. First fight we're going to talk about live on Facebook, Mike Brown taking on Nam Phan. Mike Brown, he's kind of been in a slump lately. Former WEC featherweight champion. I know he's gone through some personal struggles outside the cage that have been contributed to his lack in performance. But Nam Phan, his last fight was that controversial split decision loss to Leonard Garcia, and he was supposed to have the rematch with Garcia, but had to pull out earlier this year with a knee injury. But now Nam Phan, he's back. In my opinion, I think Mike Brown is a step up in competition from Leonard Garcia, so this is going to be a tough matchup for Nam Phan, even though he looked good in his fight against Garcia, and I'm one of many that thought Nam Phan beat Garcia in that fight. But I think Mike Brown, he's had time to sort of regroup from personal struggles that I think, what was Mike Brown going through?
Amidst training camp, there's something that happened family related that has kind of been kept under the rug, but he did break up with his girlfriend, and that was really, it was like half documented. It wasn't super well documented, but definitely some personal demons.
Yeah, so I think Mike Brown, he's going to be back on track, and I'm taking Mike Brown to win this fight by TKO in the 3rd round. I think it's going to be a good fight. And Matt, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree with you. I think Brown has the skill set and really should, on paper, win this fight. However, that's talking about the Mike Brown that was pre all of the family drama and personal issues. Assuming Mike Brown's still a head case, I see this being close, but I see Nam Phan coming out the victor. I mean, I would like to see Mike Brown get his career and life back on track. On a personal level, I just don't know if this is the fight that it's going to happen. I think it'll be close, but I unfortunately think, for Mike Brown at least, that Nam Phan's going to come out the winner.
On to the Spike TV prelims. Chad Mendes takes on Ronnie Yahya. Chad Mendes, he's undefeated in his MMA career. He's 10-0. He just won his UFC debut over Yoshihiro Akiyama by decision. Mendes was actually considered a top contender and was going to be given a title shot against Jose Aldo, and rather than wait for Jose Aldo, Mendes decided to take this fight against Ronnie Yahya. Mendes, solid wrestler, but Ronnie Yahya is no joke on the ground. He's got dangerous submissions, and Yahya, he's coming off unanimous decision victory over Mike Brown.
I think this is really a pick-em fight. There's a few of them on this card, and it's really tough to call. This is one of those fights that if I was laying money on the line, I would not even touch this on parlay, on anything. That being said, I think Chad Mendes has the cardio and top control to be able to avoid some of the submissions, and I think he'll actually want to fight a lot like Rashad Evans has in his last few fights if he wants to win this. Take him down but not really hold him there for too long. I think that I do see Chad Mendes coming out on top, although this is a really bad stylistic fight for him. That being said, yeah, Chad Mendes will prevail. That'll be my final pick. I may regret it, but that'll be the final pick.
I'm going to have to agree. Yahya, dangerous on the ground. Definitely, if Chad Mendes decides to try and take this fight to the ground, Yahya definitely could catch Mendes in a submission, but I think Mendes will do enough to mix up this fight with his stand-up and his wrestling and grind out a decision. In the main event of the Spike TV prelims, Matt Hamill steps in on fairly short notice for Vladimir Makshchenko and takes on Alexander Gustafsson. Matt Hamill, he's coming off of that unanimous decision loss to Rampage at the end of May. Alexander Gustafsson, his only loss in his MMA career is to Phil Mr. Wonderful Davis, and that was by submission. But Gustafsson, he's got solid stand-up, excellent submissions. So, but I feel Matt Hamill is definitely the toughest competition Alexander Gustafsson has faced. My only concerns are Matt Hamill used to be known for his high-level wrestling, but we really haven't seen him utilize that at all in his past couple fights, especially in his recent fight against Rampage. He struggled to take Rampage down, and I really question how committed Hamill will be in this fight to try and take Gustafsson to the ground if he even tries. Because, like I said, Gustafsson, good submission artist, dangerous on the ground. And I give the stand-up advantage to Alexander Gustafsson. Hamill's just got that slow sort of boxing, and just never has been all that impressive on the feet. So my pick, I think Gustafsson wins this fight by TKO in the later rounds and surprises a lot of people.
I'm going to have to agree with you. I think it'll be by decision. I will actually say I don't think Hamill's the toughest guy he's faced. I think Phil Davis actually was, although at the time Phil Davis wasn't as much of a superstar as he is now. So I don't think nerves will play a factor at all. Hamill's cardio is kind of usually not that impressive. It's sufficient, but usually kind of plods around flat-footed midway through his fights anyways if it goes very long. I see Hamill maybe winning the early round, but slowly but surely Gustafsson taking over. Second 2 rounds, 29-28, unanimous decision, Gustafsson. He will have to avoid power shots from Hamill with his fists, but I think Hamill's his takedown's a little bit slower, especially from the outside, and taking this fight on 3 weeks' notice isn't going to improve that. Kicking off the main card, we have one of the few matches that has remained the same, Mike Pyle versus Canadian standout Rory MacDonald. This is a fight that I'm looking forward to, mainly because I've been following Rory MacDonald, and I think you have as well, enjoying his up-and-coming fights throughout the UFC, just doing all the right things, training with GSP. Mike Pyle, on the other hand, is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a veteran who's been around for what seems like forever, finally kind of putting it all together and is changing from prospect to potential contender. And this is a fight to really find out whether it's too little too late or whether Mike Pyle will kind of be a spoil sport again and win a fight that he wasn't supposed to. This is a fairly competitive fight. I don't know if it's really a pick'em fight. I think Rory MacDonald is too well-rounded, and this might be a passing of the torch from veteran to new contender. I think Rory MacDonald's actually going to beat him. He's going to finish him, and I think it'll be a submission.
Interesting. I'm taking Rory MacDonald also. MacDonald, I think he's in his early 20s. The guy's really young, and he's coming off that impressive win over Nate Diaz, where he was suplexing Diaz over his head. I think he did it 3 times, and I think at the last one he completely flipped Diaz completely around. So to the point where he flipped and then Diaz landed on his knees on the suplex. But MacDonald, he's strong. Like you said, he's well-rounded, mixes it up with his wrestling, and his only loss is to Carlos Condit, and he was actually beating Condit until the later rounds when Condit was able to TKO MacDonald. Thank
Last
you.
10 seconds too.
Yeah, late in the fight, and but yeah, I'm picking Rory MacDonald to take this fight by decision. I just think Rory MacDonald's too young, too fast, and he's the up-and-coming talent, and he's going to want to keep up the momentum coming off of his win over Nate Diaz. So my pick, Rory MacDonald by unanimous decision. The next fight on the card, Jorge Rivera's taking on Konstantinos Filippo. Jorge Rivera originally supposed to fight Alessio Sakara. Actually was supposed to fight Alessio Sakara 2 other times before this fight. Unfortunately, I think it was a good matchup, and it's been canceled 3 times. So the fight's just obviously not meant to be. Jorge Rivera coming off of that semi-controversial TKO loss to Bisping. Bisping landed that illegal knee in that fight that really potentially could have costed Jorge Rivera the fight. And but I think Filippo, he lost his UFC debut, lost a decision, but I think Jorge Rivera, he's the veteran, he's got more experience, he's fought far better talent, and I just see him TKOing Filippo, who's stepping into this fight on very short notice.
I couldn't agree more. I think the stand-in right here, he's just in over his head. It's going to be too much too soon. Not that Rivera is some world beater or anything like that, but he's a well-experienced veteran, been in there with the best of them, and I think he's going to finish him and knock him out.
Next fight on the card is actually one I'm really looking forward to. I don't really know why, but I just think it's a great matchup. Dennis Hallman taking on Brian Ebersol. Both fighters have over 60 fights in their careers, although Brian Ebersol, this is only his second fight in the UFC. He's coming off his surprising victory over Chris Lytle. Pretty much Ebersol came out of nowhere and was put in a fight against the top contender, Chris Lytle, and almost finished Chris Lytle in that fight with a vicious knee that almost put Chris Lytle out for the first time in his career. But Lytle was able to recover. Brian Ebersol went on to win a decision. So very impressive UFC debut. And Dennis Hallman, he's the UFC veteran.
I think it's a great matchup. I think the UFC actually matched them up because they're two of the guys who have the most fights, if not potentially like the most fights out of the, they're the number 1 and 2, I think, for the 2 most fights in the UFC, potentially. I'd have to look up that statistic. They're also just entertaining guys. Both of them kind of have a unique personality. Dennis Hallman's actually helped Jeff Monson write a book, the Jiu-Jitsu Cookbook, and then Ebersol, as you pointed out to me, ever the Reddit fan, actually shaves an arrow into his chest pointing up to his head, which I don't see anyone who could disagree with that. I think it could be fight of the night. Hallman's going to try to take this to the ground again and again, try to work his top-level jiu-jitsu. Ebersol, no slouch on the ground himself, but his foray will probably be unpredictable striking. Will probably try to keep this fight standing and hopefully try to knock Dennis Hallman out. I could see this going either way. However, I think Ebersol is a bit quicker, and I think in this fight that's going to be what matters. I see him going for an explosive punch at some point in the fight, or a kick or a knee, catching Dennis Hallman and actually finishing him via TKO. And I think it'll be probably late as well.
I completely agree. My pick in this fight, I'm taking Brian Ebersol by TKO. Brian Ebersol, he's got the wrestling to match, I think, Dennis Hallman's grappling. And I see most of this fight staying on the feet. And like you said, I think Ebersol is going to be the quicker fighter. My pick, like I said, I'm just taking Brian Ebersol, TKO, in the second round. On to the co-main event, which was originally supposed to be a matchup between Rich Franklin and Little Nog. Unfortunately, Little Nog had to pull out just a week ago, I'd say, with a shoulder injury. Rich Franklin was offered a fight with Alexander Gustafsson, but declined the fight, saying at this point in his career that fight just didn't make sense. Franklin's looking to fight top contenders, people with a name, and which I understand, but depending on how bad Nogueira's shoulder injury is, I definitely thought this was a good matchup for Franklin and for Nogueira, and definitely could see this fight happening again down the line if, in fact, Nogueira can heal up soon enough and Franklin doesn't find a different opponent. But we got a new co-main event. This fight was already on the card, but now it's been promoted, and it definitely deserves it. It's an awesome matchup between Vitor Belfort and Yoshihiro Akiyama.
Like you, I was disappointed to lose the other co-main event. I think it was a good matchup. That actually, it would have been really tough for Franklin, surprisingly. I think a lot of people were sleeping on Nogueira just because Franklin's more well-known. That being said, I do think this is actually the more interesting fight, and I do actually prefer this out of the two to the co-main event. I think it's just ready-made for fireworks, knockout of the night or submission of the night, or excuse me, knockout of the night or fight of the night. I think this is going to be the fight that brings one of those two with it. Both guys are two of my favorites to watch in the middleweight division. I could see each one with just stringing a couple wins together being right back in the mix for a title shot. Very relevant fight, great booking. Exactly why Joe Silva has his job.
Yeah, I mean, both guys have a lot riding on this fight. Belfort coming off of that somewhat embarrassing knockout in his title fight against Anderson Silva. Definitely wants to rebound from that and show that he still should be considered a top contender in the division. Akiyama, he's lost 2 in a row, although I believe his last 3 fights have been fight of the night. And really just once he comes out and fights, puts on a show, and Dana's always liked those guys and has kept them around, and Akiyama's been nothing short of exciting in the UFC, and but he's got a lot riding on this fight. Everyone knows 3 losses in a row does not look good on your resume, and it's tough to keep your job, but a win for Akiyama would be huge and would just catapult him right back into top contender level.
I think this is another pick 'em fight, and I think that it's really hard to judge for both of these guys. You know, Akiyama won the fight against Belcher. I know some people think that was a robbery. I actually have gone back and rewatched it several times, and I actually agree with the decision, though I don't think that I would fault you if you would pick Belcher at all. I mean, in the Chris Lieben fight, Akiyama was less than 30 seconds away from a 30-27 unanimous decision until he gassed and got caught. So really the only fight where he has like truly kind of been down on the scorecards the whole time was the Bisping fight. And even in that fight, he wasn't really outclassed. I think everybody kind of knows Akiyama has, you know, better takedowns because of his jiu-jitsu. He hits harder.
His judo?
His jiu-jitsu is good and his judo is off the chain. Bisping kind of just mainly won that fight because he was the bigger guy, had better cardio, and had better reach. You know, it's really hard to keep your job when you have 3 losses in a row, although if this really is a good competitive fight, I could see Dana White letting him stick around like he did with Dan Hardy recently, because he knows that they do have a lot of market value because they always bring it. Part of me wanted to pick Belfort all day, every time when I first saw this fight, because I think that he just has the killer instinct where he's definitely going to rock Akiyama at some point, and I could see him just smelling the blood in the water and teeing off like he always does. But if he doesn't beat him early, which is a very good possibility because Akiyama has a granite chin, I think that Akiyama could take over in the later rounds. That being said, I don't think Akiyama has the cardio to take over in the later rounds. I think that he really actually belongs at 170, but a lot of Asian fighters, as you know, due to the culture there, just don't want to cut the weight for some reason. And with Belfort, it's really hard to judge. You know, his fight with Anderson Silva, as short as it was, he did look perfectly comfortable hanging with, you know, the top pound-for-pound fighter in the world until he got caught. And who was training to block front kicks at that point to the face?
Yeah. I thought that Vitor Belfort came out in that fight and looked scared, actually. I thought he should have come out and put more pressure on Anderson Silva and taken it to him. I think he threw maybe one combo flurry before he actually got knocked out, but I felt that Belfort gave Anderson Silva way too much respect and should have just come out guns blazing and taken it to Silva. But that is why also in this fight against Akiyama, I have a bit of concern on how exactly Belfort comes out, and if he's going to come out, stand toe-to-toe and try and knock Akiyama out, or if he's going to kind of take a step back, let Akiyama come to him and sort of wait for that one shot, that one opportunity to land his flurry of punches, because we all know how fast Belfort is and how quickly he can end a fight. But I'm really not sure how he's going to come out in this fight, especially coming off a brutal knockout like he did against Silva. With that being said, Akiyama really hasn't shown a whole lot of finishing power yet in the UFC. He hasn't really had any moments where he's had his opponents dazed and where he's running in for a finish or anything. He hasn't really had that moment yet in the UFC that I can remember.
Against Chris Lieben, he rocked him pretty damn good, but yeah, he never rushed in for it. He didn't want it.
Yeah, but overall, I just think, it's a tough fight to call, because I definitely think Belfort has the advantage when it comes to that one shot, that one flurry of punches that can really put Akiyama out. But I think Akiyama, with his judo and with his consistent sort of stand-up, can just, in my opinion, grind out a decision, land more shots, and beat Belfort. And that, in fact, is how I see the fight going down. My pick, I'm taking Akiyama by decision.
As much as I want to pick Sexyama because he's one of my favorite fighters, I see him actually kind of standing toe-to-toe with Belfort, sort of like a pride thing. I think both of these guys are just going to kind of stand and bang, like you said. Akiyama, the wise move to do for him would be the judo, but I think he's going to stand there. I think at some point Belfort's just going to catch him, and I actually think he's going to fully knock Akiyama out. I do think, like you said, he gave Anderson too much respect. Sonnen has even said, and I agree with Sonnen, that Anderson had him beat before the fight with mind games, with that mask on the scale and whatnot. But I was impressed with Vitor's skill set in that fight, with the Anderson fight. He did beat him to the punch with a combination, like you said, and then he also, I think, caught a kick and took him down rather quickly. But yeah, you're right. He didn't really capitalize on either of those things, and he really just needs to have that mental edge. I do think he will have that in this fight. Belfort via knockout.
The main event, Rashad Evans takes on Tito Ortiz. This fight was actually originally supposed to be Rashad Evans getting his title shot against John Jones, but John Jones pulled out with his hand injury that he said he needed surgery for, but in fact chose not to undergo surgery. So John Jones now facing Rampage. Rashad was then given Mr. Wonderful Phil Davis, which I thought was a great matchup because really Rashad Evans hasn't been tested by a pure wrestler that could match Rashad's wrestling abilities, and potentially Phil Davis could have out-wrestled Rashad. Who knows? But I thought that matchup was really interesting. But I'm not going to complain about a Rashad-Tito Ortiz matchup. This is actually a rematch from their first fight, which took place a couple years ago. Actually, it was back when Rashad was still undefeated. And technically, if it wasn't for the point deduction, Tito Ortiz won that fight. It ended up being a draw. And although I remember it being extremely boring, that was back when Rashad was getting a lot of heat for being a boring fighter. And Tito didn't do much to help to make the fight entertaining. So we're getting a rematch. I'm hoping that it's going to be a little bit more exciting. Tito Ortiz coming off possibly the biggest win in his MMA career, the most important win, and is going against a top contender like Rashad. That if Tito beats Rashad, this puts him right back in the heat.
Right in the mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, another interesting thing to point out, other than the fact that Tito Ortiz is stepping up for another big opportunity, this time on short notice, is that Rashad's timeline is a little bit messed up as well. Tito, on the opposite side of the spectrum, has a really short turnaround between fights. Rashad has a really long turnaround. He waited forever to fight Shogun, which I didn't really have too many problems with, even if Dana White disagreed with it. And then he got injured before that fight. We all know the story from there. Jones took his place. Things got awkward and have escalated. And then Rashad went from fighting Jones for the title to fighting Davis to fighting Tito. And a lot of people are calling this UFC 133 shit happens because of that, which I guess I can't really argue with either. That being said, I do think this is actually one of the most interesting opponents for Rashad Evans. The two that we really talked about were the only real blemishes on his record. Machida, his only loss, and Tito, which is the closest other thing he has to a loss. It was actually just a draw. But as you said, Tito would have won the fight, and because there was a lot of beef and bad blood, I think Rashad is pretty motivated for this new opponent. Dana was quoted to say that Rashad said, anyone, anywhere, just give me an opponent, and UFC did that.
Yeah, and I mean, back when they were scrambling to find a replacement, when they found out that Mr. Wonderful pulled out, I know they had mentioned Vladimir Matyushenko stepping in and fighting Rashad, who was also originally on the card, but Matyushenko had an injury, had to pull out of that. They offered the fight to Tito, and at first, news broke that Tito declined the fight, saying at this point in his career it wouldn't be a smart move, probably implying that if he had lost to Rashad, that he would potentially get the boot from the UFC, because we know Dana and Ortiz have that bad blood, and I think Tito, definitely a smart move, putting his career first when considering this fight. But they went back in, worked out a deal that I don't really know the details. I don't think anyone does, but
More money.
Yeah, Tito had a change of heart, and I know win or lose, Tito isn't going anywhere yet. So yeah, I mean, one of my main factors in this fight when picking a side is how much does Tito really want this fight. And at first, he backed out against Rashad, like I said, even though a fight against Rashad is just a huge opportunity for Tito. I mean, Tito wins, it's the biggest victory in his career. I mean, it puts him right back into title contention. And who would have thought? I mean, Tito is this close to getting the boot. He's been out with injuries for the last few years, undergoing surgery, and now all of a sudden he's in a position where he could be contending for the title again. And I mean, if this fight goes any way like their last fight, Tito has a chance to win this fight. And I think Rashad has definitely improved immensely since their last fight. when you compare the two, Tito's very much the same fighter, I think, as he was in their first meeting. Rashad, a completely different fighter. Both smarter and skill set wise. We've definitely seen Rashad go back to his roots and utilize his wrestling, although maybe not the most exciting style, but it's been effective. And but really, you can't count Tito out. And Tito surprised in his last fight against Bader, finishing Bader. And I'm excited for this matchup. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Actually, I'm pretty excited to see this matchup as well. I mean, in addition to the time factor, there's a lot of extra X factors as well. The fact that Rashad Evans isn't with the camp that made him who he was. I mean, he's always had raw athleticism and talent and has been a smart man. But Greg Jackson, GSP doesn't call him the maestro for no reason. There's a reason he has such a big following. It's unfortunate that the relationship had to end the way it did. But it sounds like Rashad has surrounded him with a good group of training partners, so his skill should be as sharp as ever, even if he does have some ring rust. But the question will be, what will his game plan be? The people who have had the best success against Tito, as far as people who can strike, which Rashad can, are concerned, have been ones like Chuck, who can sprawl and brawl. Despite the fact that Tito hasn't really taken care of his body as far as other injuries have gone, he really has kind of taken care of his chin. I mean, every time he's fought a really good striker, he's kind of just taken him down to avoid it. We saw that when he fought the guy who's in the co-main event, Vitor Belfort, when Belfort was at 205. Even though it was a decision that was controversial and Belfort probably should have won, Tito did avoid damage against a really dangerous guy. So I don't really think Rashad will probably finish Ortiz. I do think that he will be able to avoid Tito Ortiz's shot, though, especially because his shot from the outside is so slow now. I don't think Ortiz will be able to take him down very much, if at all. I do see Rashad being able to control the fight on the feet. He's sharper, more explosive at this point. It could go down the same way, and Tito could do very well. But I see Rashad Evans taking all 3 rounds on the way to a unanimous decision.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a matter of, like you said, I don't think Tito's going to be able to take Rashad down. But I think Rashad may try to mix up this fight with his wrestling, and I definitely could see Rashad maybe putting Ortiz on his back. Tito, I'm not a fan. I've voiced this in previous videos. I've just never been a fan of his style. And for some reason, this has been pretty consistent throughout his career, or at least recently, that once the fight sort of hits the later rounds, the third rounds, he sort of gives up, or he fights extremely defensive. And specifically looking at his fight against Forrest Griffin, his latest one, where the third round came around, close fight, and I guess Tito, in his mind, felt that he'd won the first and second round, came out, barely did anything in the third round, and then ended up losing to Forrest, I believe, by split decision. So I think, like you said, I see this fight going to the judges. I think Rashad will fight smart. He'll try and mix it up. He'll put Tito on his backs a few times, and I'm taking Rashad by decision. My only concern for Rashad, though, is he has been sort of rocked in his last couple fights. It's been a while. I don't think Rashad's going to really have any ring rust. I've seen some videos online of him and his current diet where he's taking just insane amount of vitamins, upwards around 20 pills per meal, I think, something like that. But he got rocked by Thiago Silva in the later rounds in that fight. He got rocked by Rampage in the third round of their fight, and since being knocked out by Machida, it seems like maybe Rashad's chin has weakened a little bit. I'm not sure Tito possesses the power to finish Rashad, and I just think Rashad's cardio will play a big factor, grinds out a decision.
Now that we've pretty much covered that Rashad, both of us agree, needs to invoke a battle plan that involves mixing up his stand-up and his wrestling, even if it's using his wrestling defensively. We both think he will use it in some manner. What do you think Tito Ortiz needs to do? What is his path to victory in this one?
Well, you can't count Tito Ortiz out. Obviously, he proved that in his last fight A lot of people gave him no chance against Bader. Surprised everyone. And I know Tito came out and bragged in that fight like, oh, I was able to finish and submit Bader quicker than John Jones did. Sort of trying to put his name in the same category as John Jones. And it's just, I mean, it's MMA, so they both submitted Bader. And I feel it was both sort of an equal performance in that Tito didn't do anything differently to stand out more than John Jones did. Anyways, but what Tito needs to do is he needs to take this fight to Rashad. He can't sit back and fight defensive and either look for an opportunity to catch Rashad. Tito needs to come out. He needs to fight aggressive, but he also has to be smart. He can't rush in and leave himself susceptible to Rashad's takedowns.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you had to put it in one word, would be just aggressiveness or perseverance, maybe.
Be aggressive. I mean, that's what, since being knocked out by, or finished TKO'd, knocked out by Chuck Liddell, I think in all of Tito's fights since then, we've seen a different fighter, that he's hesitant at times to engage, and I mean, people used to fear Tito back in the day, and Tito needs to bring that back and be the aggressor and show people why he's still a dangerous fighter.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what he needs to do. I think if I was Tito's coach, I think I would say that his path to victory would be unpredictability. As much as he would need to persevere and be aggressive, which is involved in what I think he needs to do to win, I think more specifically he needs to fake Rashad out. Rashad has better footwork and Tito is a slow shot, so why not take advantage of that? People predict Tito to shoot in, even though it's not as good. Why not do what Kevin Randleman did to Krokop in one of the most surprising knockouts of all time? Fake the shot and then pop up and go for a big shot to Rashad's supposedly susceptible chin. Or why not try to close the distance with strikes and then transition into a takedown? Tito's worst enemy is that he's predictable. The guy that people used to fear is aging now, and so that one dimension that he's really good at is harder for him to put to use. So, I mean, in his last fight, we did see some glimpses of well-roundedness when he dropped and then tried to submit Bader, which he did successfully, instead of trying to fully knock him out, which may have just let Bader recover. So I think he does have his mind potentially in the right spot to be unpredictable, but I think that is really the only way I see him beating Rashad Evans.
This was the Fight Block. Thanks for listening. It was a little bit longer of an episode, but YouTube left me a message saying that my videos can be longer than 15 minutes now. So took advantage of that, just sort of rambled on about our thoughts on this card. A lot of people are giving the UFC a hard time for putting on a not so stellar or stacked card, but it's been cursed. Fights are fights, and until the event actually happens, you really can't talk any smack about the card. So fights are fights. There's going to be some good ones probably, and I'm looking forward to it. Once again, Matt, thanks for coming by, giving your thoughts, and enjoy the fights. Peace.